We are here to talk about working people and our nation's future. You know, just a small little topic for Friday morning. And to set up this conversation, I want to zero in on that word future for a while. For 2-3 minutes, not a while. We are so glad that you all came yesterday. You went up to the Hill. You were able to advocate for near-term investments, near-term changes that we know are needed for our communities. And the benefit, one of the things I heard yesterday, the benefit of having the Hill Day first this year is that we got the chance to come back. I'm so glad you guys came back. And we get the chance to reflect on what you all heard yesterday and talk about the future, right? And that is so important, especially this year, because we need to hold two things simultaneously. We need to hold our near-term asks, what we know we need in the near term, but also think about what's coming as we prepare for elections later this year, both on the congressional level and in 30-plus states as they elect new governors. And as we prepare, we have to think about how the question of how well the economy works has moved from closer to the margins to the very center of the public debate, right? Across the political spectrum, we're seeing a focus on the economy, on affordability, on working people, and on barriers to mobility and prosperity. And sometimes all of that is subsumed within that word affordability or how people are feeling about the economy. And so this focus across the political spectrum is, from candidates on both sides of the aisle, is in part a political play. It's those candidates responding to what voters are saying is most important to them. And that is especially important this year, as I said, because of the elections. And it should be no surprise that this year both parties are vying or continuing to vie to be the party of working people. So in this conversation, we're going to dig into some of those factors that are driving that focus. And we're going to talk about how this is the moment to build common ground for a more fair and prosperous future. So I'm so excited to be joined by Taylor Joe and Dr. Michael Strain here. And I'm excited to bring their different vantage points to this conversation to help us discuss the breadth of this conversation and to understand where there is alignment. And so all of these thoughts can inform our collective work, both now and for the future. So with that, let's jump in. To start, once again, small little question for Friday morning. Based on where you are sitting, can you all talk about what are the most pressing economic challenges facing working people today?
Well, a small question. First of all, thank you for having me. It's been fun spending a little bit of time with all of you this morning. I mentioned to the boss that it really feels like a family in this room. And I am in this physical room quite a bit because a lot of institutions have their events here. And so the family vibe is much stronger here than it typically is. I think we're in kind of a strange moment in the labor market. Those of us who have been doing this for a while, I think, are used to the top concern being people finding jobs or wages not growing fast enough or those sorts of concerns. We have an unemployment rate that is extremely low, below 5%. It's been low for years at this point. We have experienced over the last few years really rapid growth in nominal wages, in the take-home pay that shows up on workers' paychecks. We have seen over the past few years a substantial reduction in wage inequality, where wages for lower wage workers were growing faster than wages for workers with college degrees or workers at the higher end of the wage distribution. So the things we're normally worried about, I think, actually are looking much better. The big concern seems to be affordability, seems to be consumer price inflation seems to be the high level of prices. You can think of that as a wage problem because what you really care about is the purchasing power of wages. And so whether or not the purchasing power of wages is growing too slowly because nominal wages are growing too slowly, or whether or not it's growing too slowly because consumer prices are growing too rapidly, those are kind of two sides to the same coin. But I think affordability seems to be what's front of mind for the American people and for members of Congress here in Washington.
I also want to say thank you for the chance to be here. Some of my team ran into you all on the Hill yesterday and mentioned something about matching T-shirts. Anyway, she loved your energy. You'll have to come back and tell me about it. So thank you again so much for being here. Just to echo, 100% agree that affordability is the issue of the moment. The math is just not adding up for families. And just to put a little bit of like how the feels and vibes piece of that into the equation, people feel like they are playing by the rules and the playbook they've been handed, but it's not working. The bills keep adding up. The dollar doesn't go far enough. People are having to make trade-offs and choices that they didn't have to make a few years ago. And that's leading to a tremendous amount of uncertainty and fear and confusion about where things are going and what it means for them and their families. Our point of view on this at Economic Security Project is that we're experiencing some acute challenges layered on some pretty entrenched challenges and cracks in our economy. And there is a lot of opportunity for us to lean into both trying to address those acute challenges while also, again, tackling some of those deeper challenges. You know, just to pull in some people's experiences here, we've been running affordability tour stops across the country, different urban, rural, diverse by professions, by income level. And there is a lot of shared experience in the frustration of this moment. As one attendee put it in Chicago, you have to choose pay or rent or eat. I have a job. I don't understand that's what I'm having to live with. These stories are all too common, these impossible trade-offs. And I think until politicians start to really sit and think about that and address it consistently, people are going to be angry. I also want to pull in that there are some generational elements here that I think we need to be thinking about too. We ran a poll of folks under 40 who are really experiencing the squeeze as they try to enter the workforce. Some of that is because of the fear around AI. Some of it is having to do with the way, again, just the workforce taking shape. They are reporting financial struggle. Over 90% of young people in this poll said that they were having to make changes to their day-to-day lives because of financial pressure. That is going to, as a product of the 2009 financial crisis, that's going to shape an entire generation's economic outlook. So I think across professions, across geographies, across generations, people feel like they're reaching a breaking point, and when families feel stretched, the country's stretched.
So broad agreement that families are feeling stretched, affordability, wages, prices, squeezing people from both ends. And that aligns with, of course, what I said at the top around both parties paying attention to this because families are feeling squeezed. But, Michael, I think you said a bit about this, some of these challenges are not new. So I want you both to talk about what do you think the economic shifts are that are really putting pressure on families right in this current moment.
Well, I think of them as kind of consisting of three parts, and so the first part is the simple fact that kind of overall consumer prices are up about 25% over the past 5 years, and that is a real hardship. It's a psychological hardship when you walk into the grocery store and you see that everything's more expensive than you expect it to be. It weighs on your confidence in the future, in how you're feeling about the state of the economy and your economic outcomes. It's also a material hardship because things are more expensive. The second component, I think, is the fact that prices are continuing to rise faster than we would like, faster than they should be rising. And then the third component, I think, consists of more structural features, problems that both political parties have been talking about for decades, the high cost of childcare, the high cost of healthcare, the high cost of education, particularly higher education, the high cost of home ownership. These are not new to this year. They're not new to the last 5 years. Unlike the huge increase in overall consumer price inflation, which is new to the last 5 years. These are problems that we've been talking about for 20, in some cases 30 years. But I think when those things converge, that creates, again, real material hardship, but also it also weighs on the way people think about the future.
Yeah. I think, people spent a lot of the last few years being like, but GDP is good. What's going on? And I think it's really important for us to continue to look under the hood to understand that a little bit better. To agree here, I think we take kind of what Michael has just said and think about it through the lens of we have broken markets and broken incomes. We might have slight disagreements a little bit on what's going on with wages. So while we have seen some growth in the last 45 years, they really have trailed productivity overall. And we've only seen kind of growth in some of those years. So as a result, inequality overall in that time period has grown, and labor's share of that growth has only decreased over time as well, which again, I think creates a sense of a pooling apart of people who make it versus those who don't. And then to speak a little bit to the rising prices part of it, again, just to put a finer point on some of the points here, homes, the core part of the American dream. Prices in just the last 4 years have surged 40 to 50%. So that's often in the median income household. You are looking at paying 6 to 10 times your income for your housing when the kind of threshold for affordability has always been 3 times the amount. In childcare, there's some numbers out there, I think we can debate exactly if they're spot on or not, that for a family to pay kind of the recommended 70% of their income on childcare would require the household to make $400,000 a year to make that math work. That is a combination of incomes, again, being insufficient and markets not working, fundamentally the math not being there. I think also 2026, things are about to get a lot harder for people, so we're about to, again, put some acute pain on that. Healthcare, for folks who are on the ACA and received the premiums, people are looking at double and tripling of costs on their healthcare. For some people, healthcare is about to join childcare as costing more per month than their mortgage, which again just feels insurmountable for many families. And then again, I think we are in the middle of a conversation around how AI is threatening our social contract around labor and education. Just out of curiosity, how many people in the room have played a little bit with Claude Code or know what I'm talking about when I say Claude Code? Yeah. So very much in the news in the last few weeks. A lot of speculation on what the workforce impact of AI is going to be. Economists will tell you right now that there's not much in the data of what's happening there, but that we should anticipate some level of transition. What that transition will look like is a big TBD. But again, I think people are fearful of that, and I think particularly new entrants into the workforce. Again, just to put a little color on this, some of the top coders in the country, which is an industry that people are pointing to the most likely impacted by AI, again, often a vehicle, software engineers, a vehicle for economic mobility for people. One of the top coders in the country posted a post being like, I'm sad, my industry is going to be gone in a few years. This thing I've built my entire career on is no longer going to exist. And so again, the scale, what that's going to look like, again, lots of big questions around that, but some change is happening and it's in the waters, and I think we need to recognize the impact it's going to have on people's sense of stability and well-being. And again, I think what you're seeing is voters exacting the political cost for it.
Mm-hmm. So I promised you we were going to keep the energy up. We want to say ground the conversation in reality, though, right? So we're coming to my favorite question, which is, okay, we know that families are being squeezed. You've given us in really great detail about all of the factors driving that, and on the upside, we could say that this is why now is the time for really bold advocacy, because we're dealing with the pace of change being more rapid than ever, right? So my favorite question, what do we do about it? Like, what are some policy ideas, especially as we go into sessions later where we're going to be talking about that a little bit more? Folks in the audience will have the chance to get some ideas out there. What would you tell policymakers to consider as we build this bold and prosperous future for workers?
Yeah. I think, again, the kind of typical answer to that question in a conversation like this would have a lot to do with the workforce. But I do think a lot of the challenges that workers are facing today are about prices and not about things that are explicit and specific to the workforce. I think on the workforce side, the first word in that logo is extremely important, and we need to really, really, really get more serious about skill building. We have been saying that for, I don't know, since the 70s, I guess. But I do think that we're at the very beginning of a wave of technological change that's going to be a lot more rapid than the digital revolution of the 1980s. It's going to be much more rapid than electrification was. It's going to be much more rapid than some previous technological advances have been. And figuring out a way to build worker skills is an indispensable component of any kind of shared prosperity agenda. That needs to, I think, be a holistic sense. The state of American K through 12 education in many cities is abysmal. We should think of that as part of skill building. We should think of federal funding for scientific research as skill building. We should think of government support for universities as skill building. And then we should think of, the more kind of classic, what do you do for a worker who didn't go to college, who has 10 years or 20 years of experience, who needs to reskill? We need to become better at answering that question. I think AI will likely help quite a bit. And AI will be able to tailor like a curriculum of skill building to individuals in a way that existing job training programs can't. So that's one note of optimism. I also think that worker training, it kind of understandably has a bad reputation in many circles because it was quite ineffective in say the 1980s. But over the last 10 or 15 years, I think we've gotten a lot better at worker training. And a key insight has been to take market forces and market signals more seriously, work-based learning programs where the people who are receiving the training are getting a lot of that training on the job, I think has proven to be very useful. The reason why I would characterize that as taking a market signal seriously is that a private sector employer would not hire an apprentice unless there was an actual market need. Because there's an actual market need, we can be confident that the skills that worker is learning are skills the market actually demands. And so you're kind of letting the market write the curriculum in a sense. And I think building on that would be very useful. I think it's also a moment for us to kind of step back and ask some 60,000-foot questions about our society and about our goals. And if we are on the cusp of substantial technological change, we need to ask some very basic questions like, do we think work is important? And if the answer to that is yes, then policies like a universal basic income for everybody that would discourage work are inadvisable. If the answer to that is no, then maybe the solution to AI is to just cut everybody a check. I think work confers income to workers, but it also confers a sense of purpose, a sense of dignity, the ability to provide for your family, a sense of identity. And we should, I think, be doubling down at this moment on our commitment to creating pathways for anybody who wishes to to contribute to society through employment. And that could involve some pretty radical thinking about how to encourage participation in the workforce and what the government's role in that is at a time when technology is marching forward so rapidly.
I'm also optimistic, for what it's worth. Because I do think sometimes the pressures of immense change force us to think outside of the narrow confines of what we've always thought was possible and achievable. I do think it's really important to name out of the gate that there is no silver bullet, I think. And I think we do ourselves a disservice to think there is a silver bullet. And I think it's going to take a mix of pragmatism, doubling down what we know does work, and some experimentation with some big ideas. So I kind of think along this in terms of a few lines. So I think one place I will say, so we actually work on, a lot of cash-based policies. So if not a UBI, have experimented with pilots across the country of can injections of cash at particular moments of people's lives make a difference. And one of the things that we have really learned is that a barrier to people upskilling, a barrier to them pursuing a better life or more educational opportunities is their current financial situation. And with these 135 pilots across, I know that's me so popular. With these 130 pilots we've run across the country, the most consistent finding that we have, in addition to people being happier and more stable, is that they want to pursue and do end up pursuing better opportunities. The rates of entrepreneurship rise, the rates of going back to school, the rates of going and actually having the bandwidth to say, hey, to their employer, I want the better job, how do I get there? And so how are we thinking about the tools that we have that can help people in these moments of transition and recognize, again, from empirical research, we know people under financial strain do not have the bandwidth to think long-term and to think about their future. So how do we provide that bandwidth, and what are some of the tools that we have for that? The second thing I think we have to be thinking along the lines is how do we create the essentials that are affordable? As Michael pointed out, it's not actually TVs that are the problem with our affordability and crisis and prices right now. It's healthcare, it's childcare, it's housing, it's food, the things that are required for people to live the fundamentals of a good life. What is government's role in making sure and thinking about those markets in ways in which, again, affordability and accessibility is core to the thesis? Again, childcare being such a prime example. It's a broken market. You both can't pay workers enough and make it affordable for parents with some sort of public intervention. Those kinds of places are opportunities for us to think more creatively about, again, what is government's role in making sure markets are delivering on some of these fundamentals. I think the other, I'll just say as well, there's some cool experimentation already happening on that. I think public childcare in New York City, or in New York State now, is an example. I live in New York, so I'm very focused on this right now, is a place in which you're seeing government say, hey, let's try something to make this equation work. I think there's opportunity for some big ideas on wealth and mobility. So there has been some recent research that's come out around how where a kid lives in the city has a tremendous impact on their economic mobility. Moving them to a different neighborhood, mixed income housing, can increase the likelihood of their income increasing over time by 50%. Those kinds of interventions are ones that we should be building into the way that we plan and think about cities and the way that we train people and create community. Baby bonds, I think, are an interesting idea that we should keep exploring. Worker ownership in places in which the workers have a stake in their company, see higher rates of skill training and higher investment in workforce development. I think looking to some of those models are worth exploring as well. And then finally, I do think we need a big narrative conversation around dignity and what good work is, and mental models of what it takes to succeed in this country. I'm the daughter of a drywall man. That was my grandfather's career. That was my dad's career. He understood himself as a craftsman. What he did was a craft. And over the course of his 40-year career, felt devalued over time in that marketplace and never really recovered post the 2008 financial crisis in his own place in society. There was an article in the New York Times recently around how construction workers have some of the highest rates of depression and suicide, and yet we're in a housing crisis where we need to build. How can we tell different stories, again, of what we value, what it means to work with your hands, what it means to, whatever form the work takes, to say this is valuable and a contribution, and tell ourselves different stories as a country about what that looks like. I've been the unfortunate position of having to install 2 new HVAC systems in the last few years. And I'm spending a lot of time talking to the folks who are installing the systems, and they're seeing a surge of people applying for those jobs because they see it as adding value right now in a place in which they can build stability for their families. And I think finding those opportunities where we can invest, telling those stories, I think is going to be an important part of reimagining where we need to go.
Awesome. That was very optimistic, and both of you all made my little policy wonk heart happy with all of these specific ideas. I think we have time for maybe 1 to 2 more questions. Some of the tension we hear sometimes is tension between policies that support workers' mobility and policies supporting economic growth. Sometimes those are pitted against each other. People say they're at odds, and I'm curious to hear you all's responses to that argument.
Well, I think they would not be at odds if there were free money, but there isn't. And so, when the government launches a program to increase the rate of upward mobility, or to build skills, or to do those sorts of things, that has to be financed somehow. Mm-hmm. And the mechanism of that financing, whether it's higher taxes on higher income Americans, higher taxes on corporations, borrowing money from investors in the bond market, that mechanism of financing does slow overall economic growth, and a slower growth economy is an economy with less opportunity for upward mobility, particularly from the bottom. I think one of the things that we have learned, not just in the last 5 years, but probably really starting in, say, 2018, 2019, is that a hot economy where businesses are chasing workers as opposed to workers chasing jobs really is the best jobs program we can create. And we have gotten used at this point to the unemployment rate being 4.5%. It's been common for the unemployment rate to be even lower than that over the last 6 or 7 years. Conversations following the 2008 financial crisis said we should be adjusting to a 7% unemployment rate. I remember when the unemployment rate went down to 6.5%, I think it was around 2014, there were lots of calls for policymakers to tighten things up because there was concern that the unemployment rate was getting too low. Well, an economy where 97 or 96 workers out of 100 can get a job, it's just a much better economy than an economy where 93 workers out of 100 can get a job, or 94 workers out of 100. And it's very hard for a skills building program or a program to encourage participation in the workforce to match those results. And so I think if you're concerned about building skills and you're concerned about upward mobility, the lesson is that you should be concerned about broad-based economic growth. You should be concerned about policies that will slow growth. Okay. Now, there's a trade-off. President Kennedy famously said, "A rising tide lifts all boats." And that's true, but it doesn't lift all boats the same amount or at the same time. Mm-hmm. And so we should be willing to sacrifice some economic growth. We should be willing to have a little bit lower workforce participation in aggregate in order to create programs that are targeted to help people who really need help. And thinking of those policies as being the outcome of a trade-off, I think leads to better and more responsible decision-making than pretending or arguing that or believing that all policy choices are between two goods and not a good and a bad.
I think I have two high-level thoughts here. Sometimes I wish, instead of thinking and evaluating a policy just through the immediate lens of cost, is asking the question, is this a cost or is it a down payment? A lot of policies, I work very closely on cash policies. I spend a lot of time on the child tax credit and the earned income tax credit. those policies have benefit. They have result in economic growth. Like every dollar that goes into a community in which the tax credit's received has 1.5 to 2 times the return in terms of local economic development. But it's often not captured in the way that we talk about and think about numbers. So, instead of just evaluating like how much is this going to cost us in the short term, and then think that's going to be a grown on economic growth, is to think about, again, is this a down payment actually in future economic growth, and also equalizing where that growth is actually happening. I think the other thing I'll say is, like, what's the purpose of an economy? To answer this question around the trade-offs, right? Is the economy not the people who make it up? And I think, again, evaluating some of these real trade-offs through the lens of what are we actually trying to build and for who, I think should be a part of our policymakers' equation.
I love that you all are, Michael, you talked a bit about being able to sacrifice a portion of the economic growth for to make sure that we're targeting programs. And then, Taylor, I think you're challenging us to talk about, is it sacrifice or is it a down payment? And I just want to call out that you all are just, I think, saying similar things, just coming at it from a different angle. And that is part of what we wanted to do today, so I appreciate that. Last question. I also love this question. What if there was one idea or takeaway you would want folks to have from this conversation in terms of hope or a big idea, what would it be?
Well, I think optimism is the empirically supported view.
No.
And
I want that on a t-shirt.
I think we should be hopeful. And there's a lot of anxiety right now about the future of work and about the workforce. And you mentioned young people who are just starting out. Certainly, they're, I think, experiencing acute anxiety. But the anxiety is diffuse. And I think that anxiety will look back on it as having been misplaced. Periods of big technological change are disruptive. They create winners, they create losers, but they never have in history resulted in mass joblessness, in the elimination of human work, in businesses no longer wanting or needing workers. And if you take a long enough view, they create enormous opportunities for people of all education levels and of all backgrounds. And so I think we should be buckling up for some disruption, but we should be generally hopeful and optimistic about the future. I think a big takeaway is really just to reinforce, I think, the mission of this organization and the purpose of this conference, which is that work is good, that public policy should encourage participation in economic life among Americans, and that it is crucial to build the skills of workers to allow them to prosper and to allow for prosperity to be shared as widely as possible. And that kind of North Star, I think it's going to be harder to keep our gaze on as technology continues to advance and as the kind of bounds of the conversation expands. Mm-hmm. But keeping your gaze fixed on that North Star, I think, will if we all can do it, it'll get the nation to the right place.
And I think mine would be the future is ours to seize. I do think we're facing a lot of choice points about what kind of country we want to be. Mm-hmm. And I think I got to take a sabbatical recently, which I highly recommend. And one of the things I did was try to go back to points in U.S. history which we faced critical choice points and what to learn from that. And really, it always comes back to understanding that the future is contested. It's not a given. It's not inevitable. And it's people who chose to step up and say, we can choose better. We can choose differently. We can choose to invest in ourselves and our communities. And those have been when we've ended up in a better place as a country and as a people. And so I think that, for me, is the future is ours to seize. The one I'm coming back with is, and starting this year with, a sense of agency and power, and to recognize that really is the root of what possibility comes from.
That is Both of you are all such a great place to end. I just want to wrap up by saying that, we started off with the challenges. I think there was broad agreement about the challenges facing working people. And then when you all started talking about what are some of the solutions, you all talked about different things, but I could see some of your ideas like coexisting in the same kind of policy framework. There may not be 100% agreement, but some of them could exist in the same policy framework. And I think that's going to be important as we talk later this morning, as folks talk later this morning about the bolder workforce policy future we want to build for workers. So I want to thank you all for your perspectives, for coming here. And I want the audience to know that our next panel will feature perspectives from our worker and business networks. And I hope you all will join me in thanking Taylor Joe and Dr. Margot Strain as we leave the stage.
Thank you guys.